Hi, folks. This is Ashish Panchanda again. Welcome to this new episode of the RiseUp Radio. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. And today is a very, very special episode. I have with me someone very special. His name is John Horn. He's currently working as a vice president at LA Family Housing and looking after very critical aspects such as culture, leadership development, and he is an avid practitioner of servant leadership. And that's exactly the topic that we're going to discuss with John today. But before we get started, I'm going to invite John to give us a little bit of a brief about himself so that we can get to know him a little bit more. So, John, over to you. Welcome to the podcast, and it's great to have you here with us today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, just a quick bio of myself. I have a 30-year career. I've been working in nonprofit organizations my entire career. I'm very focused on addressing issues that the community faces. I currently work at an organization that is one of the largest homeless services providers in Los Angeles, and have been working here 28 years on addressing homelessness, which is probably the biggest problem we have in Los Angeles. And I worked in programs, overseeing our programs for many years. And the last 7 years, I transitioned to human resources, where I was able to start to use my skills to really benefit all the employees in the organization. And I'm a huge believer in servant leadership, and I look forward to further discussion.
Awesome. Well, great. John, before we get into servant leadership, one very basic question. What gravitated you towards focusing on topics which are very close to community and poverty and housing?
Great question. I spent a lot of time in my younger years during college and just getting out of college, kind of really identifying what was most important to me. And I created my own personal why that has stuck with me my entire career. And that why is around three topics: faith, my Christian faith; two, my belief in family; and three, my belief in community.
Okay.
All three of those tie together. And I feel that being able to serve in the community, being able to address issues that the community faces, poverty, so forth, really allows me to put forth all three of those aspects. And that has what I have used to drive me my entire career and find the right opportunities.
Interesting. And thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that, John.
You're welcome.
So let's dive right in. Servant leadership, right?
Yes.
What is it?
You know, a lot of people ask that question about what is servant leadership. And I got, to me, the simplest thing is that it's not about being a leader and having power and influence. It's about being a leader and practicing the art of serving others. And it's really putting that concept of service first and foremost in everything you do, and putting the concepts of power and leadership and my authority in the back burner. That's not the priority for the servant leader.
Yeah. And typically the name, servant leader could bring some connotations in mind for people, right? And typically there are some myths associated. In your experience, what are these myths that you have heard? I have heard a few, but I would love to learn from you that what are the myths that you have experienced when people hear servant leadership as a term?
Yeah, no, a great question. A lot of people will hear servant leadership and they don't understand what it is. And when you start to explain it, I've had people say to me, oh, so you don't hold anyone accountable. You don't hold anyone
You
to
must
the
be really
goals.
timid, maybe, right? Or exactly, you're not pushing people for
You're not
performance.
pushing people. You just create an environment where everybody just is happy, but no work gets done. And
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
exact,
Yeah.
yes. And that's the exact opposite of servant leadership. Servant leadership is about creating an environment which actually allows for accountability. It allows for the work to be completed. It allows for the growth of the organization, but it does so in a way which honors and celebrates the person versus looking at people as expendable parts of a machine, which you no longer have to have any sort of care or concern for. It's lifting up the heart and leading from the heart, which is the most important way, in my opinion, to affect real change in the workplace.
So a natural question, how is it different from any other kind of leadership?
You know,
Isn't the
that's a
objective
good
the
point.
same? Isn't
Yeah.
the objective of any leadership style very similar, which is to motivate people, which is to basically drive performance, which is to meet objectives, etc. Right? So how is
Yeah.
it different then?
I would look at it in terms of what is the motivating factor for the people you're leading. And we can look at motivations in a lot of different ways. Obviously, there's the incentives, the intrinsic, the things that people need to be able to live and function effectively. You know, they need money, they need benefits, they need all of that. But if that's the only incentive that we are providing, we're not really meeting where the employee is at in their stage of growth and development. They want to be able to know that they have a leader
Yeah.
who cares for them, who values them, who has trust, who creates a collaborative environment, who provides the ability to help them to grow and excel. And that's what servant leadership is all about. It's not just looking at the bottom line of the organization or what the organization needs to be doing. It's really looking and valuing the people who are doing that work and making sure that they are feeling as though they can bring their best selves every day in a supportive work environment with a leader who cares for them.
Okay. So how's your journey been? How did you come across servant leadership as a topic, and how did you learn more about it? How did you go about it? Please tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, so my master's degree is in public administration. So when I went to college, my focus was on public administration, government, leadership. And I had a lot of different learning courses, a lot of different styles that I was able to review and see what works. And I started to gravitate towards a concept of servant leadership. And it's not a concept that's foreign. It really, when I started thinking about it and journaling and taking my notes and thoughts about what kind of leader I want to be, I really started thinking, well, what drives me when I am doing my best? What makes me do my best? And what type of leader do I like to have? And it all just kind of came together and said, servant leadership is what I want to emulate in my career because it's the way that I want to be led. And if I want to be led that way, then why wouldn't I lead others in the way that I want to be led myself? So that's really where the servant leadership came from.
Okay. I have a lot of follow-up questions that are coming in my mind, but I'm going to ask you the first one, right? You talked about self-reflection, about what kind of a leader do I want to be, right? How did you get motivated to even ask that question? A lot of times, and when did that happen as well? Because at what stage of your career did it happen? Because a lot of times I see that managers go through becoming managers and not even realizing that they have people management responsibilities, and then they have leadership responsibilities, and not even understanding what their styles are and what kind of a manager or leader do they want to be, right? When did this epiphany come to you that, hey, I need to sit down and reflect and probably even document what kind of a leader do I want to be, right? I want to create a leadership vision statement for myself, or objectives for myself. How did that happen?
You know, I think it was probably three areas. One, my faith obviously plays a role in how I approach things, and faith does require reflection. So it was something that I was very used to. Two, going to school, the professors I had really talked about finding your own leadership style, finding what works for you. And they really encouraged you to write your papers and write your assignments from that style. So that was a big way. And then three, it was just my own professional career growth and what was I experiencing when I was not in a leadership role that made me realize I like that, I don't like that, and how can I kind of build my own concepts of leadership. And that's where I started really gravitating to the servant leadership after what I was learning in school and so forth. So it was just kind of building those three things together, blending that together, that really helped me to be who I am right now.
Yeah. So it came very naturally to you. I think education and your upbringing played a lot of part in that. But
Mhm.
what if somebody is not exposed to that, right? How do they get exposed to servant leadership, or even the thought of self-reflection and
Yeah.
sitting down with themselves and starting to draft what their leadership style should be for themselves? How should they go about it?
So I'm a big believer in journaling. I'm a big believer in having journals and keeping thoughts and just writing down the thoughts that come to your mind. And one of the things I would encourage people is to just start journaling around that concept of leadership and start to just write and use some prompts. What do I like? What motivates me? What helps me to feel valued? And start thinking about these things from your own perspective. And as you start to do that, you start to see themes and commonalities that you'll say, wow, that really makes me feel good. That really makes me do my best work. And as you start to go further, you'll start to see concepts and you highlight those concepts, and before you know it, you're forming your leadership vision and style. And then you start to look at how that is going to be put into practice. And as you start to see how that's going to be put into practice, you can start to see, how does this, what I'm writing, conform to some leadership theories, and look at leadership, servant leadership, and you'll see that a lot of those things will be in line with that concept.
Hmm, interesting. Awesome. Cool. So another follow-up question that I had to your
Yeah.
previous question, right? So let's compare two leaders hypothetically, right? Let's say one is a servant leader and the other is not, right? What
Yeah.
would a servant leader be doing that a non-servant leader, if I can say that as a term, be doing differently, right? So what would two or three things could be to differentiate them?
So, from my experience, and I've worked with people who are servant leaders, I worked with people who are not. And I know this, and I don't want to make just a blanket statement and say that if you're not a servant leader, you don't care about people. But what I have seen in my experience is that people who are not practicing the tenets of servant leadership see the employees that they serve as more of an expendable product or a product to meet an end versus seeing people for who they are as a person who, yes, is there to help the organization move forward, but we also want to be able to use the organizational resources and our resources to help that person grow,
Hmm,
not just for the sake of moving the organization forward, but for the sake of that person themselves.
hmm,
And what I've found is that people who don't practice a leadership style have everything centered around the growth of the organization, which isn't bad. You want the organization to grow and be successful. But on the flip side, we want the people within the organization, the employees, to be growing and be successful. And that to me is where the servant leadership piece comes into play versus other forms of leadership styles.
yeah, makes sense. And you know, most detractors, or I would not say detractors, but somebody who would want to argue, right? They would
Mhm.
say, hey, does servant leadership have a role in a corporate life, really? Or is it maybe in a non-profit organization would be a better fit for, let's say, a servant leader?
Yeah, and a lot of people think that. They think servant leadership is really meant for the cause-driven
Cause driven,
organization, the
yeah. Hmm.
nonprofit
Hmm.
organization.
Hmm.
And nothing could be further from the truth. Servant leadership applies in no matter what organization or type of business. It could be anything. I would say some of the more famous servant leaders are those servant leaders who have brought this style, this practice to their businesses and running their businesses. You
Let's
know,
talk
the
about a few of them. Can you name a few and share with us?
Sure. So, when I was thinking about this and I had your question there, like who are some servant leaders that I can point to? And one that comes to mind is Herb Kelleher, who is the CEO of Southwest Airlines. And
Hmm.
Southwest Airlines is big in the United States.
Hmm.
And if you've been on the airline, you can see the way
I
that the
have.
employees
Hmm.
do the commitment to the job and the work.
Hmm.
And that's a perfect example of servant leadership
Hmm.
because they make you feel like you are a valued person every time you fly. And
Hmm.
that comes because the top leadership
Hmm.
is really practicing the tenets of servant leadership And you can see that in how the employees are putting that into practice.
Mm.
I think that's probably the best example that I have from the business world, because I fly Southwest a lot and I can recognize those tenets. But certainly there are other people, famous figures. Mother Teresa was a perfect example of a servant leader, and that might be somebody more associated with the cause-driven leadership. But still, what she was able to accomplish in her work is just amazing.
Correct.
So you can see, I think I can recognize when I'm in a place where servant leadership is being taught and valued versus an organization where it's not. And I think that going back to that example of Southwest Airlines, fly different airlines and see which one makes you feel best.
As a customer, right? If you're
As a
feeling better
customer.
as a customer, then working in that organization is going to be better as well.
Yes, 100%.
Interesting. Cool. Let's say a new manager, right, is starting their people management journey. What advice would you give them if they want to adopt servant leadership style? Right? How should they get started?
Yeah, so the new manager coming in, I think there are several things that they need to recognize. One, they need to, as I said earlier, they need to have some sense of the type of leader they want to be. And they need to start to kind of write that down and say, what makes me feel my best and what can I do to help my team succeed the best and do that. Two, they need to give themselves grace and space. They're going to make mistakes. They're not going to be perfect at it. There are going to be those times when it just doesn't come together and they act in a way which is not servant leadership. But the servant leader recognizes those times and also reflects, asks for feedback, calls out their behavior. It's one of those areas where they are asking for not forgiveness from the team, but acknowledgement of what they did and stating that they'll do better. It's really practicing strong emotional intelligence. And I would say any upcoming leader really needs to focus on emotional intelligence, because that is a key aspect of a servant leadership lifestyle. You can't just be flying off the handle with whatever emotions you have and expect people to believe that you really are there for them. So I would say, know your style, give yourself grace, practice emotional intelligence, and you're going to be on your way to success.
Yep. John, honestly, these are very, very big words, and they don't come easy to a lot of people naturally, right? It needs a lot of hard work. It needs a lot of persistence. It needs a lot of forgiveness as well to self, right? Okay, as you make mistakes, you need to forgive yourself as well, right? What can you suggest in terms of resources that can make their lives easier, or easier to get started as a start? Are there any books? Are there any journals? Are there any things that they can refer to, or mentors or coaches? How should they get started?
Sure. Probably the easiest way is to use LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn. I search servant leadership all the time.
Okay.
So many great articles, so many great infographics, so many great resources that come up. And not just looking at the resources, but look at the comments of the people who are commenting on that resource, because that's where you start to find some of the real nuggets of truth, and start to follow people on LinkedIn and read and ascribe to what they're saying. That's the most practical way to get a lot of information. But there are some books that have been very helpful to me. There's an author who passed away several years ago, Warren Bennis, and he wrote a book on becoming a leader. And that's a book that's really helped me out too, in terms of just not just servant leadership, but just a style of leadership that really values the employees. And you can do Google searches on servant leadership. I mean, leadership styles, looking at all the different types of ways that you can motivate people. All of these things are resources that can help you.
Right. Cool. What are some common pitfalls that people should be wary about when they're just starting?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but one of the pitfalls, well, I would say there's two pitfalls. First is believing you don't hold people accountable with the servant leadership style. Huge pitfall. You still hold people accountable, but it's the way you do it, which is important. It's not about discipline per se at the start. It's about how do we learn from this mistake and move forward.
Yeah.
And at some point, you may have to do discipline, but you're doing it in a way where you've exhausted your other efforts first.
Correct.
Second, don't try to, and I said grace earlier, don't try to do everything at once. You're not going to be perfect. There are tenets of servant leadership. You're not going to practice all of them perfectly. Focus on one or two. And I would say focus on listening. Focus on listening is maybe one of the most important. And try to build from there, because, you know, there are 10 tenets of servant leadership. You're not going to be able to get all 10 perfect. And I'm 30-year career in leadership, and I'm still learning and working towards it. So give yourself that grace and just practice and focus on key areas that really make a difference.
Cool. That's some good advice. So really love it. And do you think the team working under a new manager or new leader who's trying servant leadership for the first time could feel lost?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because they, again, you know, when you get into the workplace, the focus is on the success of the mission. The focus is on the success of the organization, whether that's creating as much profit as we can or ending this problem that we have to solve as a cause-driven organization. And that can become your focus. And you can start to look at that so much and say, okay, we just got to get there. We got to move. We got to just produce. We have to solve. And you can get away from seeing the people you serve as people themselves and what they need to feel valued, what they need to feel connected, what they need to feel is happening for their growth. And if you try to just focus on the end result, you're going to forget the people who are helping you get there. So you want to kind of take that step back. I always go back to journaling. I always go back to looking at what's working, what's not, and seeing how, okay, am I focusing too much on our end goal, and am I forgetting what's happening with the people I'm leading, and what is happening with our team? Am I seeing attrition? Am I seeing people not looking happy? Am I not listening to what's happening with them? And that's where you just want to take that step back and refocus, reset, and say, okay, how can I effectively do both? Because they are not, it's not an and or, it's a both and.
Yeah. Interesting. And does coaching or mentoring help in this journey?
Oh, absolutely. You want to find a good coach, a good mentor, find someone that you can confide in, and find somebody who's brave enough as a mentor to be able to correct you when you're saying things that don't make sense. And, you know, that's again where LinkedIn can come in as a connection point to find people who you might be able to follow and start to develop a relationship with, and start to ask, hey, can I reach out to you from time to time for more feedback or guidance on servant leadership, and tell you how I'm doing and have you give me real feedback? Invaluable to have a mentor.
Awesome. So I'm going to invite our audience to reach out to you in case they need help and pick your brain.
Sure. I'm always happy to share with the time I have. No problem.
Awesome. Well, John, we've come to an end to our discussion. Are there any additional parting thoughts that you would like to share with our audience today?
Sure. First, thank you for the time. This has been fantastic. It just flew by. Really appreciate being talking about servant leadership. And just a parting thought, value your employees, not just for what they do for you, but for what you can do for them. That is the most important thing that you can practice, and I encourage it wholeheartedly.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. So that's all about servant leadership coming from a practitioner himself. So, you know, get your journey going. And like John said, if you need any help, don't forget to reach out to him on LinkedIn or any other coach or mentor who's following servant leadership. And in addition to other resources that are always available at your disposal. I hope you enjoyed this chat. I personally thoroughly loved it, and I learned a lot as well. So thank you, John. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast and sharing your thoughts with our audience today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, you take care till then, till the next time, and we'll see you with a new topic and a new speaker next time. Bye-bye.